Okay, so I will read you the text I wrote when the war in Iraq started, and it was my contribution to that competition for the House of War. And I called it a heartless text, but heartless in between quotation marks because it is actually the very opposite. So it's short. So I begin to read. The House of War, a heartless text. Icarch Gallery declares war on war. And this is a paradox because I am fighting against war, but I declare war on war. So life is paradoxical because when you have a strong opinion, sometimes you fight, meaning you use aggressive forms of persuasions, even against, it's very difficult to be peaceful against war. Against war, you have to be active. You have to be, to have vitality. I know there are ways of opposition like Gandhi, you can also protest silently or peacefully. Yes, I would agree. But this is just a text. Anyway, I'll read it to you. So, we declare, or I declare war on a placid life, on those who think that time is money, on those who think that flowers and animals are meant to entertain us, the humans, on mercantilism, on hypocrisy, on those who replace the human being with a consumer, on those who commodify everything, including their own soul, on those for whom questions are to be relegated to the field of ignorance, on those who think that Mallarmé was wrong when he wrote, "A poem is the only bomb worth making." I love this quotation from Mallarmé. A poem is the only bomb worth making. Beautiful. On the rhetorics of capitalism, on the retrograde ideas behind any national park, any reservation, any zoo, on the obsession with well-being, infantile and misleading in its assumptions, on the pillage of the world in the name of a ferocious appetite for consumption and profit, on those who think that the human being is reducible to eating, sleeping, and frivolous entertainment, on those who smile without a cause, on those who answer the question, "How are you?" with the word "great," when internally they are bleeding, on those who do not read, do not sing, do not dance, do not dream, on those who throw books to the garbage, on those who throw life to the garbage, on those who think that a blade of grass is less important than the proud oak, on those who think that their religion is right, on those who think that we need more roads, more so-called urban developments, more forests cut down, more extractions of any sort, oil, precious metals, anything, on those who protect the so-called rights of the Indians by confining them behind the fence of the reservation, on those who so-called protect the animals by confining them behind the fence of the national park, on those who so-called protect art by confining it behind the fence of the ubiquitous museum. Icarch Gallery, this is the website I started, believes, together with Dostoevsky, that beauty will save the world. But this beauty is not the sweet so-called beauty promoted and cultivated by Hallmark-like enterprises. This beauty incorporates but transcends the so-called ugly, incorporates but transcends pain, incorporates but transcends the shadow. This beauty is suffering transgressed, aesthetically sublimated in doer truth. Anyway, now I will show you, maybe I should show you the architecture of Günther Dominic, yes, because somehow it connects with, and this is probably an architect you never heard of, and he is very interesting. Viennese, Austrian, and this is a man who built a building which just happened to be a bank at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, that is very, very dramatic inside. And so it was built about 50 years ago in Vienna. this is how it looks outside. And even towards the outside, it has the, you know, the power of a metallic mask. And it is, in a way, you know, it has the appearance of you know, expecting or being prepared for some kind of war. And the war is actually within the architect who built it. Well, when I visited it, now it has a different function. Unfortunately, the bank, well, you know, the bank was also inappropriately suited for the building, or the building inappropriately suited for a bank. When I visited it, it was a luggage store. Sorry for it, but that's what it was. Some people rented the space. But look at the interior. You know, it is a dramatic interior. It is the interior that shows conflict. Look at the contorted pipes. And, you know, all the building, especially in the central area, is like this. It's very visceral and very tormented. And it shows inner conflict. Again, sorry for the luggage. I don't know what was in the head of those people who rented this space. It has nothing to do with the luggage. Just look at them. Anyway, but look, ignore the luggages and look at the architecture. It is an architecture of turmoil. It is an architecture of conflict. And, you know, paradoxically, when you have the courage to externalize conflict, if that conflict is authentical within you, something happens. I think you purge, you become cleaner because you express the truth of your turmoil. But all the architecture of Günther Dominique, I will show you also a house he built for himself in the same spirit. Ah, this luggage is incredible. Look at the ceiling in front of the building, I mean, under the canopy as you enter the building. This was a picture taken in the 70s when the building was built. And, you know, at that time there were no pieces of luggage. Some drawings. The drawings are more lyrical than the reality of the building. They are very sensitive and, you know, very detailed. But the building, at least in some parts, is quite dramatic and moving. But what is shown here is actually inner conflict. You know, I believe that the external war is connected with the inner war, that what we usually call wars could be avoided if we confront the inner demons. If we have a war within ourselves, instead of dealing with it, we prefer to start wars outside of ourselves. And that's why wars happen. It was even said that the most difficult thing is to conquer yourself. If the people who start wars in general would confront their own demons, then we won't have wars any longer. But it's much easier to attack another country than to attack yourself. Now, this architect, and he's not the only one, of course, Günther Dominique, by creating this building, he confronted his own demons, so to speak, and externalized them through architecture, through his art. Here he is, that's the author of the building. Well, he died. And now I'll show you his own house, which itself shows conflict, inner conflict. This was his soul, actually. This is the house he built, also in the 70s and 80s, I believe. He kept working for years on this house. And it is a house that is based on conflict. It is the expression of conflict. But usually the deconstructivist did this. He was not considered a deconstructivist. He actually did this before the arrival of deconstructivism in architecture, about 20 years earlier. But I hope I have here in this presentation the plans for the house, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, this is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao by Frank Gehry. Anyway, we are back to Günther Dominik. Now, maybe Günther Dominik would have agreed to Lebesgue that architecture is war and war is architecture. But such a statement, as far as I know, never came to us from a different century and from other architects. So why is it that today we have this anxiety within, because it's about anxiety that we need to express? You know, such fragmented and tormented buildings would have been inconceivable in other centuries. There was suffering in the world, there were wars in the world, there were crimes in the world, there was death in the world, there were pandemics in the world, but architecture tried to bring peace and equilibrium to people, not to. So it is a strange phenomenon, and perhaps we should talk about it. Look at the house on the right here, you know, and look at this house. Now, of course, this one is much bigger, but it's not about dimensions. How do you compare? I mean, they are contemporaries. This little house is contemporary with this house, if we can call it a house. How come that such divergent conceptions happen at the same time? You see here, you know, I mean, this construction by Günther Dominik is protesting against everything else around it. And this is the plan. Can you believe it? You know, it's obviously an expression of conflict, of war, in a war. But Günther Dominik didn't kill anybody. Maybe he killed himself metaphorically, but he externalized his tensions and his drama and his conflict through his own work. And that is, I think, the best we can do. If we do have an inner conflict, let's approach it and let's express it creatively, not through bombs. That's what Mallarmé wanted to say, and said it very well. The only bomb worth building is a poem. Through a poem, you don't kill anybody, and you express what you have to express. Anyway, I can show you many examples, and I'm sure you know also of architectures that represent conflict. In fact, on the same presentation, I have another one about Wolf Prix, who also from Vienna is building an architecture of conflict. In fact, Wolf Prix even said, let it bleed, let it leak. Architecture must blaze. Can you believe it? An architect who builds, and builds a lot, and builds interesting buildings, advocated the cause of blazing. You know, again, someone who is calling the others to set to fire, in a way, their architectures is, I think, someone who is not quite happy with the state of affairs in the world. So again, Wolf Prix, and I will show you after Günther Dominik a few works by him, and Kopp Himmelblau. He said, and I've heard him in a conference, and he said it also in writing, architecture must blaze. Let it bleed, let it leak. So another expression of conflict, of tension, of anxiety. Now, it is not an accident that psychoanalysis was born in Vienna. You know, Dr. Freud, that's where he started his practice in Vienna. Here we are having two architects. I'm not saying they are the only ones. Even Zaha Hadid was an architect of conflict, at least at the beginning of her very rich activity. So much so that actually an architect from Ahmedabad sent me a few days ago or 2 weeks ago a project that I didn't know of Zaha Hadid with skyscrapers turned upside down. So instead of having the skyscrapers point towards the sky, they were pointing towards the center of the earth. They were underground, in fact, inappropriately called skyscrapers because they were actually earth scrapers. Yes, there is such a project, and if you leave me your email address, I can send you the project. I was very surprised. I didn't know about this, but this says something about her so-called dark side as well. Anyway, so this is Günther Domenig in Austria with his own house, to an extent at least expressing inner conflict. And now I will show you some works by, I will not show you other works by him. I will show you some works by Wolf Prix, because I think they are relevant to this discussion. I will not show you everything. He has a very vast body of work. I will just show you a few samples. Okay, talking about architecture and war, maybe I can show you what he did in South Korea, a cinema that is a tour with gravity, because you can envision a conflictual relationship that is taking place on various levels. And okay, just a second from current slide. The Busan Cinema Center in South Korea by Wolf Prix and Kop Himmelblau, where you see this huge roof is floating. It really seems ready to fly. And it is vast. It is a huge canopy that is not supported by anything. You see there the slanted, slab, so to speak. Here we have another expression of architecture and war, a war with gravity. Wolf Prix doesn't like gravity. He said usually a building had 4 legs, then we subtracted 1 leg and we remained with 3 legs. And he said, we are still unhappy. We want to remove the 3rd leg and remain on 2 legs. And when he was asked to give examples of 5 buildings that are a must-see for any student of architecture or architect, he included a plane, I don't know, Boeing 747 or whatever, a plane. So, but look at this. This is a building which in good measure is almost totally ignoring gravity. Of course, it was done with a lot of expenditure. And, at the time when he built it, people were not so, interested in sustainability and so on. But there is something here very interesting, and I will tell you what it is. So this cinema, which is, tour de force, in terms of structure and in terms of its meanings in a way, has a weakness. And I will tell you about that weakness. It is spectacular indeed, but in essence, what does it say? What does it convey? I think it says, I don't want to be conditioned by gravity. So I am going to, make my building aspire towards flying. But But do you see in the section? So this is the section of the building as it was built and imagined. But in a conference that I attended, he said that while the building was in the process of being erected, so the construction started, the regulations about the seismic activity changed. So the requirements became more rigid, more drastic. So the building was not any longer responding properly to the new requirements, but they couldn't change the building. It was almost built already. So you know what they did? Do you see a vertical here? They created, the architects created a telescopic column, which in case the seismic activity increased beyond a certain limit, would spring automatically from the earth and support the corner that was the most vulnerable in this incredibly cantilevered structure. You see it here too. You see the telescopic column. So, you know, this could make us think, you know, we want to fly, but we are not birds. God didn't make us birds. We don't have wings. We can fly through imagination, through poems, through that very poem that Mallarmé mentioned when he said is the only bomb worth making. I would say with architecture too, I admire the quest for making spectacular buildings of Kop Himmelblau, but I think gravity should be acknowledged and respected and even have affection for it. In my opinion, gravity is the only certitude we have. And it's a cosmic force. We don't quite know what it is. So to be at war with gravity is almost like to be at war with God. You know, if you accept, it's in a way a paradox, because you might appear to be a coward if you don't fight what restricts you. But when I think of the great temples of the past, and here there are people from Indonesia, and you have great temples in Indonesia, if I am to mention just those in Borobudur, those temples didn't fight against gravity, but they still make you feel that they were flying, although they were very heavy, built with stone. But in spirit, they were and they are flying. Not explicitly, not with wings, but spiritually, metaphorically, poetically. So the same with the Gothic cathedrals in Europe. They don't have wings, they don't fly literally, but they fly metaphorically through the space they created, through you know, the spirit that infused those buildings. But since the topic of today is architecture and war, and you know, I just played with a word and I put a quotation mark, war architecture. I think there is a connection between war and architecture, but mainly on two planes. One, the inner conflict of the author, and two, the conflict with nature. Because any building is more or less explicitly a provocation to nature. But the best buildings, I think, in the end, arrive at some kind of a cohabitation with nature. And great architects, I think, didn't try to fight nature. I think great architects found a way to assert their individuality as human beings, but at the same time to connect with nature. And I would be curious what you think. You can anytime interrupt me or step in. Please, I'm very interested to know what you think. Do you think architects just fight against nature, or do you think it's possible to both assert your humanity, meaning at least in part, being different a little bit of, you know, different from plants, different from animals, different from the gods, but still somehow to be able to communicate with them and cohabit the earth with them. What do you think? Are you still here? Because I don't see the list of with the participants. And if you ask here, please be courageous and open. Again, this is not a school. Let's talk.
Maybe in terms of sustainability, we just probably need to cohabit with nature. Maybe, I mean, probably that's my opinion.
But okay, even if it was not a talk about sustainability, for example, Frank Lloyd Wright, when Frank Lloyd Wright lived, or let's talk about, you know, the Borobudur temple. You know, the Borobudur temple is not, is definitely the work of man, of human beings, but I don't see it as a provocation to nature or even an insult to nature. I see some kind of a, um, you know, an integration, I would say, between the cultural artifact that it represents and the landscape around it, and because it is an offering to the gods, is I mean, an implicity towards nature as well. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright was asked, do you believe in God? And Frank Lloyd Wright said, yes, I do, but I spell it nature. So as long as you are, you know, yes, you have affection for nature, I think you certainly avoid a war with nature. But what do you think about this building? How's the picture you see right now? Do you think it is a war with nature or it is a peace with nature?
If maybe gravity is part of nature, then yeah, maybe in its perspective, then maybe yes, it is in war with nature, I guess.
Yes, because it is forcing the issue because of the ambition to, you know, neglect gravity, and gravity is, you know, fundamental force in nature. And you know, on the other hand, it is true that, you know, interesting architectures try to have very long cantilever surfaces, and you know, we like to assert our freedom in this way. But there is a lot of great architecture in the world, and I just mentioned Borobudur. I could mention the pyramids. I could mention a lot of the buildings of the past. They didn't have cantilever surfaces. By the way of this, how do you explain it? In my opinion, there was never so much freedom in the world like today. Today, well, now with the pandemic is different, but before the pandemic, you know, we could have traveled, we could have taken the plane if we had the money to buy the ticket, we could have lived in another country, we have all kinds of freedom, you know, all kinds of freedom in society, you know, romantic freedom, all kinds of freedom, and yet, strangely, we are still unhappy. We still want more and more freedom. How do you explain it? You know, there was a philosopher who said in ancient times, the human being was enslaved by the gods, was the slave of the gods, but was highly creative. Today, we are free, but we are sterile. And maybe this building that we look at this very moment is the expression of an exasperation. The exasperation of the fact, born from the fact that although we are free, we actually feel bounded, more bounded than the slaves of ancient times. How do you explain it?
Yeah, maybe if it's in your view, then yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe in this building, it just looks like as if it is like this is the human's aspiration itself, and it really wants to just want to put it out. So that's why maybe just go against with nature. So I think, yeah, maybe it's pretty difficult to basically try to counteract with that argument.
Well, even this one, I'll show you also this work by the same architect, Wolf Prix, and his company, Kop Himmelblau. This one I visited, is in Germany. Well, sorry, I thought I had more images here. But I can show you one of the first buildings, if not the very first one, which was maybe the first deconstructivist building ever built. Was on top of an older building in Vienna. And sorry, is something wrong here? Yeah, just a second. I can also show you, because it's also about the same thing, Le Musée des Confluences, the Museum of Confluences in Lyon, in France, done also by Kop Himmelblau and Wolf Prix. And it was built just a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. So, this was also about conflict. It says it was conceived as a medium for the transfer of knowledge, but it is called Le Musée des Confluences, which in French means the Museum of Confluences, of conjunctions, to bring things together. And it's the theater of an assumed clash of forces, and both the interior and the exterior. So, there is war here as well, very much so. I mean, you see the roof there seems to collapse within, and there are all kinds of vortexes within the building. The only problem is, and I visited this building, is it's monomaterial. It's very metallic, and it's I don't know. I think this is a problem, but in terms of a space, it is interesting. And look at the plan, and it's a museum. It's a science museum. Rather morbid, these these bones hanging from the ceiling, and but what do we see here? We see the results, the effects of the human attack on nature. We put the animals in the zoos, so we talk about war. No, it is an ongoing war, trying to assert the supremacy of man. So we kill the animals, we kill the plants, we put them, if we don't kill them, we put them in the zoo, and if we kill them, we put them in a museum. It's all about the control of man, the age of Anthropocene, the age of man. And I think this has to stop. The climate change is telling us to stop. Maybe even the pandemic is telling us to stop. The rising level of the sea is telling us to stop. the icebergs are melting down. We push too far the war with nature, and nature is replying to our abuses. And when I see this picture, this is like a metaphor for the abuses of man in, I'm talking about the human being, in our interaction with the world, with nature, with cosmos, with the air, with the oxygen, and so on. Look, this is what we did, and this is what we do to our world, you know. Everything becomes an object of study, of analysis. Yes, we achieved some maybe great things, but also with what price? If you are so kind to turn off the microphone because I hear a noise, thank you. So, you know, talking about architecture and war, we kill each other. We start wars, that it is in Vietnam or in Iraq. But we also started and continue wars. It's a continuous war between the human being and nature. Please be kind and turn off the microphone. I hear a noise. And the building is expressing this conflict. You know, it's the building is externalizing, you know, the image of what we arrived at after unending wars. Now, the architect says that this is an expression of the complexity of our world. In a certain way, it is, but it is also an expression of a conflict we do not try hard enough to solve. Even this one, I will continue this work by them, Kop Himmelblau, the Pavilion Mini Opera Space, which was built for München in Germany. And look at it, there is conflict here too, there is war. Apparently, when the building was designed, it was designed based on two musical pieces, one from Mozart and one from Jimi Hendrix. And they, through scripting and programming, they arrived at these, you know, aggressive forms towards the street, apparently in an attempt to fight off the effects of the noise of the cars nearby. We'll arrive at a diagram about that. It's another example of a building that is at war. It is at war with not just the car. It's maybe an expression of the inner war of the architect or a war with society. It has a level of aggressivity, obviously. And it makes it, I mean, this level of aggressivity makes the building stand out and interesting. But still, this says something about the world we live in. We are not living in a peaceful world. We are living in a world that is traumatized by all kinds of excesses. But it does express the time we live in. Yes. Because it seems today we cannot build any longer like this building on the left, you know, with straight walls and so on. No, because the dynamism, the tensions, the conflicts, the agitation, the anxiety of our time does not allow us any longer, whatever the schools of architecture might say. You see here in this diagram with a section, the noise of the car that hits. Well, apparently this is almost like a disturbed animal that responds back with this triangular, with these pyramids pointing back and against the car. But I think there is more to it. This is just a functionalist, you know, attempt to justify the form. Maybe the form is not really born from such functionalist you know, requirements. You know, after all, the architect who conceived it is the one who said architecture must blaze, architecture must leak, architecture must bleed. Anyway, by the way of this, I will end with, but I will show you the diagram. I hope I have it here, that the building, at least in its expressionistic side, was inspired by the music of Mozart and Jimi Hendrix. Here you see Mozart from Don Giovanni, and you know, they did a scripting concept, and then they arrived at something like this using the pulsations of the music. And then here, Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky by Jimi Hendrix, where also they use the same technique, computerized technique, starting from the music to arrive at the vibrations that animate the building. And now I will go to something else. I want to show you some architecture, since we are now in Vienna, some architecture from, let's see if, Angst Baroque. Some architecture projects from a very interesting school in Vienna, contemporary projects by architecture students. Well, they were actually young architects who studied at the Institute of Architecture in the program called Excessive. And I organized an exhibition in Vienna in 2017 called Angst Baroque. Angst Baroque, because why angst? Because I believe it is a question of anxiety, and their projects show that their authors were at war with themselves. So again, it's about architecture and war. So you will see a few projects, diploma works by young architects who already graduated from an architecture school, and then they entered the postgraduate program in Vienna. And you'll see some of their works, and I'm sure they will shock you. So projects from the postgraduate program at the Institute of Architecture in Vienna. This was, an evaluation of, the director of the program was this one on the left with mustache. Here, Hernan Diaz Alonso, who is now the dean at SciArc in Los Angeles, and some professors, and then anyway, the students behind them. The program was called Excessive, and excessive they were. Philip Wilk, who now works for Foster and Associates in London, and he worked actually for Kopp Himmelblau in Vienna. He's a German architect. This was his project. His diploma work, I think, for a house of music in Vienna. You see here also a tormented architecture. Why is it tormented? Well, it was supposed to be related to music, but also it expresses the anxiety of our times. And it's a house in turmoil. Look at a top view, almost a plan. Look at studies for the building, all done in Maya. Here we can also talk about the conflict or the war between the Cartesian system and something else. So this is a reaction, fluidity is a reaction to excessive orthogonalism and Cartesianism and so on, against the right angle, against the rectangularity, against the straight lines. And Maya afforded them to work in this way. Here you see a section and some perspective. Sorry, the resolution is not great, but you can still have an idea. And you can, if you are interested, you can see the school does not exist any longer, this particular program, but you can find on the web, its website, and you can see all the projects during the, 8 years or so. This program lasted for about, 8-10 years or so in Vienna. And as I said, it was a postgraduate program. Now, project of an Indian architect, Santosh Kumar, the avant-garde music house. Here again, you see a conflict between the existing urban structures and what he proposed. So there is war between his proposal and the fabric, the existing urban fabric, the plan. Now, they could not have done such projects using the T-square and the rectangle. They had to use sophisticated softwares, and they did use Maya. So what we see here is a war between this building here and the proposal of this architect. And they all work kind of in the same way, in a very unconventional and provocative way. Maybe the interior is not so unexpected, but outside it is. So again, this is about conflict. Conflict between an existing city and its rectangularities and its Cartesian structure and something else that disturbs it. It's an architecture of disturbance and disjunction, in other words, of conflict. Laura Meza, look at this house. Look at the existing houses, left and right, and look at what she proposed. This is again architecture and war. Look at the plan. I mean, who's ever saw such a house? Well, it's a reaction against domesticity. It is a reaction against rectangularity. It is a reaction against conformism. It is at war with what I just mentioned. And in a way, it's also a revenge of nature, you know, because the natural is coming back into architecture with renewed force, almost with anger. It's a return of the repressed. Look at the section. There are no flat floors and, you know, vertical walls, barely, you know. It's cave-like. That's why I made a presentation not too long ago called the cave revival, because indeed the cave and the problematic of the cave is coming back, is returning. And we have an example right here. It's a cave-like environment made by a human being in an, you know, existing urban situation. Alexander Schmaga, the Vienna Concert Hall, look at it. Another war on domesticity, war on predictability, war in conformism. It was an attempt to imagine a concert hall that is tormented and expressing its own anxiety and its own inner conflict towards the outside, towards the city. Look at the plan. Look at the perspectives, interior perspectives. Look at the exterior. Look at the existing building and look at what he proposed right in the center of Vienna. Okay. Uh, I can show you other things because I have plenty of materials that are, you know, connected with this subject. Okay, I can tell you also by the way of war, a new birthhouse for Adolf Hitler. This is a competition I launched 2 or 3 years ago, and I will explain to you why. Because in Branau am Inn, there is the house where Adolf Hitler was born. And Austria didn't do anything about this building. It just stayed there when it was known very well, even the room where Hitler was born. Now, of course, the building doesn't have any guilt. The building didn't make any, you know, it wasn't the building that started the war. But this is a building charged with a heavy symbolism because Hitler was born in that building. So I thought that that building should be transformed into some kind of a manifesto against the war. So another world war will not happen. There was a lot of discussion in Braunau am Inn and in Vienna, in Austria, what to do with that building. I still don't know what they did to it. They didn't know what to do with it. But we launched this competition, and I will show you very quickly. I will not explain, but because there is a lot of text. But if you are interested to analyze or to study further the projects, you can find them on the website that I publish, which is icarch.us. And then you go to, you know, Hitler, or I imagine, yes, it's under the subtitle Hitler. You'll find it, or anti-war. Yes, icarch.us/anti-war. And you can also watch on YouTube an interesting, if you just type in Braunau, this is the name of the town, Braunau am Inn, you'll discover some interesting materials about the house where Hitler was born. And quickly, I will show you some images of the projects that we received. We didn't yet announce the winners. That's why the authors are with their code. They're hard to see, a little bit hard to see, but they all deal with this subject: architecture and war, architecture and death, architecture and Hitler. Can architecture do something so we will not have again another war? Could architecture fight for a more peaceful life? Could architecture oppose what it is supposed to oppose? These are very interesting if you can read the text and then reflect on the images. So again, if you are interested in the subject, please visit the website. You see, the Vietnam, you know, it's because the war is within ourselves. That's why they never end. But we have to try to fight for peace. And it is a continuous fight, like the fight for freedom. It will never end. Yes, the war happened in Vietnam in the 60s, in Iraq, the beginning of the 20th century, the Second World War, I'm sorry, happened in the 40s. But essentially, the human beings are unable to achieve peace. And I do think architects are supposed to fight together with the others. If you believe in justice, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in certain values, you have to fight for those values. You cannot just take them for granted. That's why I believe militant architecture would be a good thing to activate. This is the building where he was actually born, on the third floor, the third window from the left. So here was actually the room where Hitler was born, but you'll see other pictures. with this. So this was the house where this, malevolent force, human force, came to life. And, so many people suffered because of that war. So many people died, as you know. Even the atomic bombs that have been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they also happened because of the madness of this war. The wars are terrible, as you know. And unfortunately, we do not become quite aware of how terrible they are unless someone dear to us dies. And it's said we shouldn't think of ourselves. In fact, I would generalize and say if anyone dies, we all die. And if anyone is born, we are all born. So we are all together, really, or should be together. Anyway, there are all kinds of proposals here for what to do with that house. You see, house of anti-war. But you have to read the text in order to understand what people proposed. A story of renewal, hope, and remembrance. Yes, and this is what I'm trying to do with these Zoom presentations. I think it's very important to remember certain events and certain people because we can learn from them. For example, tomorrow I will talk about two architects. A woman, the first woman who studied at the Bauhaus architecture, and a German architect. And the day after tomorrow, I will talk about the very famous Rem Koolhaas. It will be his birthday. So every single day, or almost every single day, we will meet in order to learn from practices or events that meant something to architecture and to culture in general. Today we met because, as you know, in 1969, on November 15th, it was that huge protest against the war in Vietnam. And it moves me to know that 2 million people protested all over the United States against the terrible war in order to convince the politicians to stop it. And it took them a long time to stop it. And, yesterday I learned also that they did something terrible to Vietnam, that the American army was sending planes above the forests of Vietnam, and they were dropping called the orange agent or Agent Orange, some kind of a substance, a powder that would kill the trees. So the flying bombers or planes of the invaders would be able to locate the Vietnamese who were transporting food or whatever or walking through the forest. So what did they do? They killed the forest. They killed the trees, so the trees would not have foliage. Can you believe it? And can we call this human wisdom? Really? Is this wisdom? Apparently 20% of all the forests of Vietnam had been killed in this way. And at least 1 million people, well, some died, some became, malformed or deformed or handicapped because of this poison that was dropped from the planes on the forests. Incredible, including American soldiers who suffered too. This is the madness of war. That's why we have to stop wars. It's a must. It's much easier to start a war than to try to understand the other one and negotiate with the other one. But the effort must be made. Anyway, as I said, this is the room where the baby Adolf Hitler was born. You have to read the text if you are interested, and some of the projects are quite interesting. But all in all, this is about an attempt to unite architecture with other fields of human endeavor and to participate to the social, political life as actively as possible, as we should. So I do believe in a militant architecture. Some of these projects have a lot of pages because when I launched the competition, I told them we accept any work, any size, any format. So some sent, books almost with a project, others with large prints, all kinds of, you see, the House of Anti-War, a new Geburtshaus for Adolf Hitler, a new birthhouse for Adolf Hitler. Frustration, yes, frustration, because we must be frustrated when we fail to defend peace. There were all kinds of visions, all kinds of proposals, but they all attempted the same thing, to protest war, the madness of the war, through architecture. And architecture can do that. And actually what we have here is architecture is peace, not architecture is war. Or you can put it the other way, is at war with war. Architecture defends peace, it doesn't defend war. But there is a dialectical relationship, because sometimes you defend peace by being a warrior against injustice, a warrior against war itself. Okay, I had other projects, but I will stop here with this. I can show you something else, just a second. Harvard projects, Gordon Manor, Francis Bacon, Bismarck Towers. Yes, since I mentioned Vienna, I will show you, and this is not related directly to architecture, but I can show you, because I talked about inner conflict, I will show you a few works by this very famous Austrian Viennese artist who exemplifies through his work the drama of the human life and the drama of the human condition and the war within, or the war with oneself. He is one of the most famous artists of Vienna at present. And maybe without a surprise, he uses a lot of red as a symbol of blood, but I also think he works with blood itself, and you will see, and you will be surprised. But it's about cruelty. It's a cruelty that manifests itself in many ways. War is cruel. Through war, people die, and atrocities happen. A war also could happen, religiously or spiritually, when you are at war with yourself or the authority of the God you are supposed to believe in, if you are to believe in. Here there are some references to some kind of crucifixion, and the suffering that it implied. But you will see some theater he conceived and activated that is incredible, talking about war and talking about conflict and talking about blood. Thus, this mystery theater Look what he did. You know, he engaged these actors, these you know, volunteers or whatever they are, in some kind of you know, Dionysian orgiastic mystery theater, where it shows clearly conflict and war and blood. And you know, yes, this is a bomb named poem, the only bomb worth making. It is true, it's violent, but it remains at the level of aesthetics. It remains at the level of art. Uh, and better do this than what Hitler did, you know, with his gas chambers and his, you know, concentration camps and so on. You know, here you sublimate cruelty into some form of art. Uh, because here the suffering is lived as theater, and it stops at that. But it is dramatic, of course. It's some kind of an ecstasy in reverse. It is ecstasy, but achieved through the madness of violence. Here is real blood, the blood of an animal that they just try to, you know, devoid, so to speak, you know, in these incredible gatherings. You could say that there is madness here. Well, maybe to an extent you could say there is, but you know, there were sacrificial you know, happenings in ancient societies as well, and they actually went they didn't just do theater. You know, there were concrete offerings to the gods, sacrifices, killings took place in order to alleviate a certain happening, or in order to you know, please a certain god, or to avoid something. You know, things like this happened always in human history, in more or less concrete or dramatic forms. Okay, I can keep you here the whole night, but let's see first if you are still here. Yes, you are, and I will